Welcome to Sanity, a podcast by the New York Sun. My name is A.R. Hoffman, and every week, along with my co-host, Rebecca Sugar, we'll try to make sense out of the nonsense and bring some sanity into your week. Today, we're going to start off, our top story is going to be an awful one, a terrible one, and that's the Texas floods. We'll sort of reflect and talk a little bit about a still ongoing tragedy down south. Our Make It Make Sense is we're going to talk about the right to remain silent, the right against self-incrimination, and specifically relating to Joe Biden's doctor. Sort of interesting ideas to dig into there. Our tipping point is going to be a little bit of a grab bag. We'll talk about Jeffrey Epstein, and we'll finish up with our sunburn. So thanks for joining us as always. And Rebecca, you have a quote of the week.
The quote of the week this week is by Sean McGuire, partner at Sequoia Capital, who made some public statements about mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, calling him an Islamist, and he's gotten a lot of blowback. And he posted on X, I think it was yesterday, Sean McGuire did, the following: Western civilization is approaching the event horizon. If we don't max thrust our boosters in the other direction, we're not going to make it. I couldn't agree more specifically when it has to do with the potential of electing a socialist as the mayor of the New York City, the sort of capitalist center of the world. But I think that quote's equally applicable to a lot of Western European countries and to Western civilization generally on a whole host of fronts: free speech, all the ways in which Western civilization is unraveling. So I know he's getting a lot of flack, Mr. McGuire, for the things that he's said, and he's doubled down on what he said. But I want to say that I agree with him, and I think we should all be taking that very seriously. And
just on that note, be sure to tune in on Sunday for our interview with Mark Penn for really a deep dive into the numbers on the mayoral race, inside scoop. There's no better pollster in the business, and it was a really great conversation.
That's right.
You enjoy it. Okay, so the top story are the floods down in Texas. From the first got wind of it, it was clear that this was going to be a defining tragedy. It sort of had those components, the sort of astounding biblical-like flood, the unendurable, really, tragedy of a camp, young kids and the girls camp, and the death toll, still continues to rise, and it's one of these tragedies that seems to pop up every summer, and kind of Mother Nature. I think it was Tennyson who described one of his poems, nature red in tooth and claw. This idea of nature can be wonderful and beautiful, but also savage and brutal.
Yeah, well said. It's tragic in so many ways. The stories of some of the victims are coming out. The stories of some of the heroic first responders are worthy of mention. I think my first reaction beyond the tragedy, the human tragedy, was sort of what you just alluded to when you said biblical. Really in a society like ours in the 21st century, it's just hard to be reminded that we are not masters of the universe and that Mother Nature is stronger than we are. For all the talk about what went wrong with our warning systems and our technologies, at some point we have to accept that we couldn't just stop the rain. We couldn't stop the effects of the rain. And it felt like something you read in the Book of Genesis or the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? How could a flash flood be a mass casualty event in the 21st century in a first world country? So hard to grapple with and humbling, that is.
Yeah. I would just add, as someone who went to summer camp and very much enjoyed it, it just seems an especially cruel tragedy. I mean, the idea of summer camp is that, the structures are temporary. It's usually bare bones. You're not in your usual house with all of its protections. And it's sort of an enchanted place, right? It's supposed to be a place where that's safe. That's sort of almost utopian. And so there's just a particular pain in this. And I was just so unbelievably impressed watching on TV some of the counselors and people at this. I mean, just their poise and their strength.
Right. Counselors who, by the way, my son is a counselor at a camp this summer. He's 18. Yeah. We're not always talking about full-fledged adults.
No. I mean, really teenagers.
Yes.
And I will say, and obviously there was kind of a lot of mudslinging, no pun intended, and that by and large is the opposite of helpful. But I think there are sort of good questions here people would like to know. I mean, why wasn't there an early warning system, right? The flood kind of gathered overnight when people were asleep. I mean, there has to be some kind of way to better alert people. As you know, I was in Israel, and there's an elaborate alert system for rocket attacks, right? Is there some kind of, could you build that for kind of natural disasters? I don't know.
Right.
But
yeah, well, by definition, you're right. We have to do better because this cannot be the result. It's not necessarily to say that what happened wasn't planned or thoughtful. It just wasn't, it didn't rise to this moment. And this was the worst flood they've said in 100 years. And so it's possible that nobody really could have thought of this and think of the right ways to address it. I think, though, that some of the responses, to call them mudslinging is just to not say enough about the kind of shocking reactions that some people have had and the ways in which they have leveraged this moment for the worst kind of political and ideological purposes, right? The woman took to TikTok to point out the race of these young girls at this camp.
That ugliness
and to suggest that, they wouldn't have worried about it if those children were black and brown. And so before you get your boots on, she said, and to go help, think about that. I mean,
that's toxic. Yeah.
Don't. And it's not to say one person, the doctor, the pediatrician, who wrote about sort of, these, maybe they, I pray for them, but they're MAGA people and they're climate deniers. So you get what you get. It's not to say that people like that are representative of the whole. I'd say by and large, there were many, many more good stories than bad stories. But it's not enough to just say these are one-offs. There were lots of responses and a lot of, applause for these kinds of comments. And we have public officials who were sort of trying to make this about Trump. We have celebrities. We had Rosie O'Donnell. We had George Stephanopoulos on the news trying to suggest that maybe Trump's budget cuts led to this. You had Senator Chris Murphy. You have Chuck Schumer saying he wants an investigation into Trump because he's really responsible. The sort of low way in which we respond to these tragedies really reared its head here and made an ugly situation much uglier.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I also think that a first job of the government is to keep its citizens safe, and that obviously failed here, and so I think there has to be some accountability, whether it's at the local level or more important than accountability, structures put in place so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, Kerr County is known as Flash Flood Alley, so it wasn't that people didn't know that flash floods could happen here. Yeah.
And, I also think, there are a politics to national disasters. I mean, Bush never really recovered from Katrina. I'm not saying it's at that level, but, to your point about the biblical, and we kind of we look at it within a human context, and there's sometimes this question of, sometimes it's scarier to say we can't control something than to blame, or to that assumes that something could have been different.
Exactly.
And maybe the harder truth is sometimes innocent people die, and it's the worst.
Yes, and especially in an age of high technology, it's even harder for us to accept that, because we think we can control everything from the human genome to drones in the air, every cloud seeding. We do sense that we have control over our environment, and every once in a while we're reminded that we don't fully, and that's hard.
Yeah. I mean, one thing to watch out for is, Texas has a Senate race coming up. Not Ted Cruz, who was in Athens and came back, but John Cornyn. And, there's now, Colin Allred is running on the Democratic side, and he gave Cruz a pretty okay race. Not, didn't win obviously last time, but some of the polling is suggesting that Jasmine Crockett, who was kind of out squatting the squad, is up some 15 points in the primary over Allred. What a wild race that would be.
Now you've scared me. I didn't know that.
Okay, let's end obviously all our prayers and thoughts with everyone down there, just
by the way, whenever these sort of catastrophes happen and people say my thoughts and prayers are with, I sort of shrink a little bit because it sounds pat and cliche. I think given that it was a Christian summer camp and just the context of it generally, I think it actually does matter to send your thoughts and prayers. And
especially prayers. Yeah.
I'm going to hear that sentence differently from now on.
Yeah. Okay, our Make It Make Sense is sort of the Biden, the cover-up, story now is the Republicans in Congress are launching investigations and hearings into kind of what happened. This is sort of in the wake of the Jay Tapper book, which we talked about. And now sort of attention is focusing on Biden's personal doctor, Dr. O'Connor, who took care of Biden for 4 years. And has now invoked the Fifth Amendment. He was subpoenaed to testify. You kind of generally have to obey a subpoena, or you can face contempt charges if you don't, especially with the same party controlling the DOJ and Congress. That would have been a fairly, I think, easy charge to have filed. And Dr. O'Connor just said, I'm not going to answer. He invoked the Fifth Amendment.
Right.
But not only Fifth Amendment, also doctor-patient privilege, which is super interesting.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about this because it feels to me like there are a couple of different things to think about here and some legal implications. So first of all, the doctor-patient privilege he invoked, which all of us understand and I think are sympathetic to, but there are instances where you are allowed to break with doctor-patient privilege. And I had read that the D.C. Court of Appeals had already ruled that that's only relevant in a court of law, but this was in front of Congress. So was he obligated under doctor-patient privilege?
It's a great question. It almost seems like designed for like a law school final exam in evidence. So just as a basic background, privilege means that some kind of interactions are protected. They can't be used as evidence. Very few privileges are absolute. Which means they always have exceptions. And generally the way to think about privilege is it's seen as, do some relationships require protection in order to function? So two of the more famous privileges, or let's say three, are, doctor-patient, the idea that your health is a private matter and that it should, you may not be willing to talk honestly with your doctor if you think the doctor is going to turn around and tell the police or whatever. The second is attorney-client privilege, right, which is in some ways the most ancient privilege, this idea that you won't be frank with your own attorney if you think he's going to snitch on you. And the third is, there are a few, is sort of like confession booth privilege, that clergy or pastoral privilege that in speaking to
maybe the most absolute of them all.
In speaking to a religious figure, you should, you can't say something in confession and then have yet used against you. So I think most people would agree that privilege makes sense. But in all those circumstances, right, the privilege only applies if the interaction is like in that professional context, right? If I'm your lawyer, Rebecca, and we're talking, just shooting the shit, that's probably not going to be attorney-client privilege. Whereas if we're in a conference room, like working, that sort of is. So none of these, just a long way of saying, none of these privileges are absolute.
But here, he was President Biden's doctor, so he was acting in a professional capacity, but the privilege that he's invoking is happening in front of Congress, not in a court of law. Does that matter?
Right. Yeah, so generally one of the ways in which you can what's called pierce the privilege, meaning gain access, is if there's criminal activity or if the interaction is being used to further criminal activity. So if I confess to my lawyer, okay, I did it. I'm OJ, I tell Alan Dershowitz, I did it. That you can't use. But if I'm working with my lawyer to commit fraud, you're not protected there. So you would need some kind of criminal predicate. But it's not a crime for a doctor to withhold the fact that a president is incompetent or unwell. Right. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road here, is like, was there criminal activity, or was this just a sort of a political cover-up without a crime?
Which leads us to the invocation of the Fifth Amendment.
Right. And by the way, if, this, to your point, if this were a court case, you would have the whether the privilege applies could itself be contested, right? So there could be hearings about, like, is this a kosher invocation of doctor-patient confidentiality? That would have to be something that, the burden would be on overcoming the privilege.
Right.
And so I think what they've done here is to say, like, it's either or and both, in the sense of, like, it's either covered by doctor-patient or standard variety Fifth Amendment, which is, the right against self-incrimination.
Right. So he invoked the Fifth when asked directly by Comer if he was told to lie about President Biden's condition, or if he ever personally thought that President Biden was unfit to serve medically. Yeah. And so that's when he said, I invoke the Fifth. Right. And he suggested that there is an ongoing DOJ investigation, a criminal investigation, which is why he would invoke the Fifth Amendment. So, and that would be the appropriate, not the response that we watching want, but it is fair to invoke the Fifth if there is a criminal investigation.
And that's a really important point, Rebecca. The Fifth can only be invoked if there's legitimate fear of criminal jeopardy. Right. I can't just invoke the Fifth just because I don't want to answer. It has to be. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to go to jail tomorrow, but there has to be a credible sense that there's something at stake here.
Do we know that there is a criminal investigation and that this doctor is named in that investigation?
No, I mean, as far as I understand, I could be wrong. I don't think there's been even a criminal referral, right? Which is generally what would happen first. So then that wouldn't be legitimate. The question is whether a congressional investigation by itself, would amount to a criminal investigation. I mean, I think just to kind of abstract up from the legal element a little bit. I mean, the question of, is a president's health a private matter or a national matter, is a really interesting question. Yeah. We've had presidents, refuse to give their medical records, give medical records that seem kind of like fake. I mean, there's, on the other hand, this is the nub of this whole issue with Biden, is like his incapacity. Was it just a personal issue, or like, no, you have the most powerful job in the world,
or not even those two questions, but did it actually impact the job in some meaningful way? Meaning, was he too incapacitated to know that he was having the auto pen sign legislation or executive orders or pardons? So that would actually impact the running of the country. And then I think it's in the public interest. It's not about, did he not feel well that day? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people were sort of rattled by the cancer, right? I mean, do the American people have a right to know if their president, before the election, would that have, things were so far gone, I don't think it really would have mattered. But one can imagine a close race between two kind of aged candidates, and one is seriously sick. Yes. That is going to make a difference. It's material in the legal sense.
One has to assume that this doctor clearly knew that President Biden had cancer, and I can't prove it, but we all understand that he knew, and that he knew that the president was also in some stage of mental decline. Yeah. So what are his options at that point? It seems to me that he could either resign as the president's doctor because he feels he can't keep such secrets and it goes against his conscience.
The question is, and this is a great question, is like, what it's not, why does the doctor have an obligation to the American people? Like, it's not clear he does, right? He has an obligation to his patient. But maybe you can say being the president's official doctor puts him, again, not in a legal sense, but in a sort of more broadly ethical sense, he does have some sort of duty to report.
He's the only one who really has conclusive proof one way or the other, right? He is running the tests.
Right. But, again, if you think about, like, let's say your doctor, you'd want your doctor to give you all the facts. Whether who you tell or and how you tell, I mean, that would probably be a personal decision.
So
but again, you're not the president.
That would be the other option for the doctor, right? Couldn't he have gone to
I think he was probably honest with Joe Biden. Right.
But could he not have gone to the defense secretary or somebody else and said,
but that stuff is confidential.
Worried.
I mean, like, would he... That he would breach his medical duties, I think, right? To show, like,
But doesn't the 25th Amendment allow for some procedures to...
If the president is incapacitated,
yes. So the question is, what is incapacitated mean?
It has come up. It's come up in more sort of innocuous ways if a president needs a brief procedure or needs anesthesia. He'll appoint someone for an hour. I don't even know if that's officially invoking it, but that's sort of one application. Right. This was a deeper question of, like, could the president perform the duties at all? And then what is the role of the doctor there, Okay,
so forget the legal question
it'd be fun
now.
to talk. It'd be fun to talk to a doctor. Maybe we'll have one on to kind of, like, really get a sense of, like, maybe it's a little bit similar. I mean, not exactly to, like, a doctor on a sports team. Right. And let's say, like, the star player is really injured, but doesn't want the doctor to tell who's paying the doctor's bills is maybe an interesting question, right? Is the doctor the team's doctor? What if there's a disagreement about treatment? Where does the doctor, so you can say, generally, I think Dr. O'Connor and all these doctors have medical appointments at hospitals or universities. Do they get a salary from the White House? That's an interesting question too, right?
Future Sanity interview show. I think we just put that together now.
Yeah.
But just quickly, so non-legally, just in terms of the politics of this and the optics of it, what do you think this, moment in front of Comer did to, if anything, to the Democrats and to their...
Listen, I think Democrats want to put this behind them as much as possible, but I think, I think I've said this from the beginning, from when we were talking about Jake Tapper's book, Rebecca, that, I just think Democrats have a true trust deficit on this issue, not to sound all political consultancy, but, like, until they address it, I think it's one of the reasons why Americans don't trust them and don't trust them with power. And I think, the sooner someone... and the problem, of course, is, the tape is what it is with all these people. But sometimes you just got to say, okay, it's a bad tape, and I was wrong, or and you just got to kind of face it square on. And I still think the first person who does it will reap the rewards.
100%. That's the part that always shocks me. There's such an open lane here for somebody to just say, I lied. I covered up because we all know what it was.
Run the tape on anyone saying X and Y. I think unfortunately in today's kind of debased political culture, that's not as disqualifying as it once was. So you just take the hit.
Right. And it's not a trust deficit, like that is the polite way to say it, but people just know that they're being lied to, and so yes, the way to overcome it is to do a mea culpa and man up and say the truth.
Yeah, and maybe it gets harder, the closer to the inner circle, so maybe it's like it'll be harder for Kamala to say for obvious reasons, maybe even cabinet members, but if you're someone like Andy Bashir or Wes Moore, you didn't have a relationship with the president, just come out and say it.
Or I go back to this, Dr. Jill, where are you? You have no political sort of stake here. She's not going to run for something. Just man up, woman up. And just say what we all know to be true. I knew he wasn't well. I knew he couldn't perform his duties. Maybe she should throw herself under the bus so that poor Dr. O'Connor
There's also, there's also
to.
A spousal privilege. So
anyway. Okay, moving on. Maybe that leads us into the Epstein conversation in our tipping point segment, right? Because this was the Trump administration came out this past week, just a few days ago, and said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, There's no client list. There are no files on Pam Bondi's desk of all of the clients. Just sort of not. It's not there.
Yeah.
We've done the review. Trust us. Here's
Yeah.
this video with the minute to midnight missing, and it's just clear that everything that we thought happened over the last however many years now just didn't. And this was the first time in this administration that I saw, shades of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Tony Blinken, Karine Jean-Pierre, where they just looked into the camera and bald-faced lied to their people. And I think it's a bad look. There are a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of conjecture about why they said it this way and why they did what they did and how they did it. So even if everything that they said were true, which I don't know a single person who believes that, but maybe you'll disagree, but the way that it was done, the fumbling, sort of searching for the right words, trying to thread the needle stuff that Pam Bondi certainly got caught up in, and even Caroline Levitt, who's such a pro, sounded like she was trying too hard. It was just so not convincing and persuasive. And I think that they're going to, I don't think this is going to, kill the Trump MAGA base. I don't think it's going to destroy their future, but it's the first real ding in that way. And I think it was an unforced error. Yeah. And there better be a really good reason why they're lying about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just from the politics of it, it's the classic, rule of politics, don't overpromise and underdeliver. And this was, Pam Bondi had staked a lot of her own credibility on this. It had become an issue. And usually, the kind of Trump crowd is really in tune with their base and it really has their finger on the pulse. As you said, this was a case where there's real disappointment. I don't know. I mean, I think one, like Occam's razor would say, well, if they had something, they would share it. But I don't know. I think with a lot of these things, whether it's the Kennedy files or the Epstein files, the payoff has been a lot less, than the anticipation. Maybe that's sort of just in the nature of things.
Right, but it also, isn't there a question of, Ghislaine Maxwell is sitting in a jail cell accused of trafficking minors for the purposes of sex with Jeffrey Epstein and other clients. So if there were no minors trafficked and there are no clients, why is she in a jail cell? So free Ghislaine Maxwell now?
Yeah.
Is that the next step?
Right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it was, that there was a sense that, there was going to be some kind of explosive revelation about like Bill Clinton. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know, what exactly was expected. I do think now it's kind of like sort of amazing to see now Democrats taking up this kind of like reveal, reveal the files.
Yeah.
Just as a political football, I don't know. I mean, I think I agree with you. If you would sort of like zoom out or you'd see it in the movie, you'd say there's something up here. I mean,
clearly, I don't even like it when people sort of hedge on that because so obviously there's something here.
Yeah.
What it is, we may never know at this point, which is really a bitter pill to swallow for people who elected somebody they thought was going to be transparent, particularly on issues like this.
Yeah.
And if you do believe that he was running an international pedophile ring and sex ring, one might just want that to end. So that would be reason enough to show us what's going on and to name names.
Yeah.
If that's what was happening, then it would still be happening, and we've done nothing to stop it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we could say about the nature of conspiracies on whatever side you believe, whether you believe there was a conspiracy that not there or a conspiracy that was there. And sort of what people, as you said, like what people expect of their government in terms of bringing information to light. You know what I mean? Lots of like UFO people have been like, why won't the government? There are these sort of interesting things where.
Do we put this in the same category as those kinds of air quotes conspiracy theories? Meaning those are sort of without any evidence whatsoever, and this is with so much evidence.
Yeah, I guess I'm just like, maybe this is just dumb, but I'm not clear like what would a list mean? Like sort of like evidence that would be used at trial in terms of like against Epstein,
Who
or sort
is
of
he bringing these young girls to? Just give me one name.
Yeah.
Why is there not one name?
Yeah.
Why don't we know anybody that
Yeah.
was there nobody?
Yeah.
Is that what we're now
It's
thinking?
interesting to compare it to like the Diddy trial, right? Which was also a sort of trafficking and conspiracy. And I don't know, do we know the name of the women who accused him, but like, do we have a complete list of like who was at these parties or?
Well, there's so much, like as with this case, there's so much talk about there being a list, but then we never see it.
Yeah.
But we also know, we've seen video footage, let's say, or I have, because I've been addicted to those
Yeah.
Diddy freak off
Yeah.
videos as they were released. I mean, you see videos of, a young Justin Bieber at one of those parties, in a compromised sort of state, or you hear audio. So there's certainly enough evidence to give rise to the to downgrade this from conspiracy theory
Right.
to theory.
Yeah.
And that's what's very alarming to people.
Yeah.
Like, it's not UFOs that somebody said they saw out in the desert somewhere, but they have some fuzzy picture. It's like there's just too much stuff here to ignore
Yeah.
that I wouldn't put it in that basket anymore.
Yeah.
And
I find the whole thing, I mean, I like you, I think, like totally bewildering. I mean, how he made so much money is like unclear to me. How, people like Les Wexner and others and Leon Black, whoever, just gave him like millions. These are smart, tough people. And just gave him tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
I remember, when the news came through that he was dead, and it was shocking. I mean, it was really just one of those moments, where you're kind of like, where were you? Kind of like, this can't be real,
Yeah.
So just to say, I
and
hear you.
I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but again, I like to distinguish, like, I don't think this is a conspiracy theory, right? The minute to midnight missing in the tapes, and Pam Bondi sort of suggests that that's what,
Every
it's the
tape
same
has.
minute, every tape, and that's what everybody does. And then, I don't think that's actually true, but she hasn't produced evidence that is true a day later. I would have had that at the ready if that were the case I were making. So it sort of suggests that she was fumbling for some kind of answer. And if it is true, then aren't you sort of broadcasting to anybody who wanted to do anything bad which minute to do it in? And so
it's like a Mission Impossible, perfectly
is it better
timed.
that we have a prison system like that, housing one of the most notorious so-called, accused criminals of our time, that has a system where there's a minute window?
No, it's ridiculous.
I just, the whole thing doesn't ring true, and I think everybody senses that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay, I think it's time for sunburns.
Go ahead. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So mine is going to be about canceling your friends. I recently had a very good friend who decided, they couldn't be friends anymore because of my position on Israel, without really even knowing what the position was or really investigating it. And I just think it's appalling. I think one of the most toxic things about our culture is the way that people or impose litmus tests on friendships, how we import the intolerance of our national scene and our politics into like intimate spaces that should be free of that, and just more durable. I think there's something specifically pernicious about this when it comes to the Israel issue, because of how it can feel anti-Semitic, because of the sort of fervor and obsession that people have with it, because of the way in which it's exaggerated and painted in the most apocalyptic of terms, because of the fact that even people who have no connection to it, or honestly no knowledge of it, take it as sort of a totemic issue. I think it's become the issue of the left, not just one issue among many, but the defining issue. And there are lots of reasons for that, many of which are deeply informed, I think, by anti-Semitism. I mean, obviously there's, things like bigotry and intolerance are evident everywhere. There are people, just as kindness and goodness are, but I think specifically there's a kind of censorious progressive left that has arisen that is just really nasty. It's nasty, it's intolerant, it's fanatic. I think one of the things we try to do on this show is to oppose it, not through kind of like name calling, but through kind of conversation and exploring ideas. You can bet I'm going to continue to fight it as much as I can.
Okay. Well, let's name call. What's his name? Let's give
gonna-
his phone
I'm not
number.
gonna-
And
I'm
his
not-
no, no, I'm kidding, but not kidding. But his loss, because
thank
you're a
you.
good friend to have.
Thank you.
Okay, my sunburn is sort of a mixture of sunburn, sunlight. The sunlight is that the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, announced this week that they signed the National Farm Security Action Plan, which really, for the first time, openly addresses the issue that farm security is national security. We have known, this is the sunburn part, we've known for years now that the CCP, the Chinese government, has been buying up large swaths of agricultural land and other kinds of plots of land strategically placed around the country, sometimes in just fields, but those fields can be next to, the facility where the B-2 bombers are made, or they can be next to a military installation. And I think I even read at some point that they were the owners of the commissaries on American military bases.
Wow.
So every time anybody swiped their credit card there, they got all that data. And so you can imagine the million and one ways in which this is not good for our country: surveillance, stealing information about our crops, which is food security. It's a major issue. It's been going on for too long, and people have known about it and have done nothing about it. And finally, real attention is being paid. And I just want to add that I looked it up. The largest individual farmland owner in the United States is Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. Yeah.
Who is an American citizen, so he's perfectly entitled to own as much farmland as he likes. But I would suggest that we don't necessarily want our seeds and our farmland in his hands only, for a host of other reasons that maybe we'll talk about on another podcast. But farms in America matter. They matter to this administration, and they matter to the future of this country. And this is a great step forward in defending our American farms.
Great. Thank you. We'll see you next week, Rebecca.